I would like to bring the Public Employees Committee meeting to order. Ms. Rogers, please call the roll.
Alderman Rhodey,
Present.
Alderman Vollmer, Alderwoman Hubbard,
Present.
Alderwoman Murphy,
Present.
Alderman Bosley, Alderwoman Clerk Hubbard, Chairwoman Howard.
Present.
I think I'm on this committee, am I?
Quorum being. No,
I'm not on this committee?
but that's okay. You're welcome to
For
stay.
some reason, I thought that I was on public employees.
Joe Vollmer is, but not you.
Oh, good. Okay. Well, thank you. Then
But
I'm
you're
going to
welcome
leave.
to stay.
Well, I'm going to leave, but thank you. I'm sorry about the other meeting going so long, but thank you.
That's okay. Okay. Let's take a moment to review the minutes from the meeting we held September 16th, 2020. Have we all had a chance to review those minutes?
Sure.
May I have a motion to approve the minutes from September 16th, 9:30 a.m.?
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Ms. Rogers, please call the roll.
Alderman Rhodey,
Aye.
Alderman Vollmer, Alderwoman Hubbard,
Aye.
Alderwoman Murphy,
Aye.
Alderman Bosley, Alderwoman Clark Hubbard, Chairwoman Howard.
Aye.
4 aye votes.
Okay. Today we have before us a resolution. Let me get back to my notes here. Resolution number 57, introduced by President Reed, and it's leave options for the city of St. Louis employees on election day. And I've invited the Director of Personnel and a representative from the City Councilor's office to inform us about this bill and what it means to the city employees. Director Frank, who would you like to speak first? You?
Yeah, I'll speak first. Thank you. Excuse me.
Okay.
First of all, I'd like to thank the members of the Board of Aldermen for the continued support for ways that we can pay our employees more. And I appreciate that. I appreciate that with the board, approving the 3% increase for the next 2 years, which we haven't had in years. And I'm stuck in the middle of a citywide compensation study. We're scrubbing the data right now, working with the consultants, which we know we can't afford now, but Lord willing, in a year or so, hopefully we'll be able to take some more action to be able to increase and make our salaries more competitive. But that being said, I was presented a copy of resolution number 57, and I have concerns, and my concerns are not the spirit or intent of it, but that there, in my opinion, there are 2 very serious prohibitions against doing so. One is the city charter, Article 18, Section 19, which was brought to my attention by Ms. Silsby. And it specifically states that civil service people who are in the competitive service cannot take an active role in a partisan campaign. And it goes on to define what some of those activities are. And being a worker at the polls is one of those activities.
Excuse me.
Yes.
Director
Yes, ma'am.
Frank, you're breaking up.
Oh, okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, that's much better.
Okay, thank you. So I was referencing the charter prohibition under Article 18, Section 19, which Ms. Silsby can certainly address as well because there's some case law. And then additionally, and even more specifically, Civil Service Rule 15, Section 2C specifically defines some of the activities which are not allowed for civil service employees. And bring it up here, it says specifically that no person in the I can't even speak, sorry, it's so small, position, okay, can perform or take an active role. And it defines an active role is defined as those activities which essentially attempt to influence voters to vote for a particular candidate or party, including serving on a campaign committee as chairman, treasurer, or other officer, circulating petitions provided for by any primary or election law for any candidate or party, acting as a worker at the polls or phone banks. And that provision has historically been interpreted throughout the years as including working as a worker outside of the polls, working as an election judge, or anything of that nature. There's another concern outside of these two provisions, and that is that no city employee can accept additional payment from another government entity, or that also violates the charter. Civil Service Rule 15 goes on to say what happens if a civil service employee is found to have committed one of these acts. And it is a very serious type of infraction. In fact, if that is thought to have occurred, the director of personnel is instructed to conduct an investigation, present his or her findings to the Civil Service Commission. And if the commission finds that the employee did engage in one of these prohibited activities, including acting as a worker at the polls, they are to be dismissed. And I am to notify the comptroller accordingly. So that is my concern, my grave concern. I will say in my 16 years, we have had instances where employees have been dismissed. The comptroller had to dismiss an employee for simply emailing support one time for a political candidate on a partisan issue. And that went up to the
Seems like we're frozen.
Yeah, I was gonna say that.
Can the host do anything about that?
No, that's on Mr. Frank's end. That's his internet or his computer. Everybody else is moving
Okay,
and talking just fine.
okay. It seems as though he's, okay, I guess he's off the network, I guess. So since his screen is blank, is that true?
It's hard to say. There he goes. He's going to reconnect.
Okay. Is President Reed on this? I guess not. Okay. Let's give him a few minutes, and then if he doesn't get back on, I'm gonna ask Alexis to either expand on those notes that he was and present these city councilors' views on that. I'll give him another minute.
Sorry, it booted me off.
Glad you're back.
Thank
Okay, we were waiting for you.
Thank you.
So
Oh, God.
I'm not sure where I cut.
I believe you were talking about the pay issues of paying people for, but you're frozen again. I don't know if he can hear us. I'm going to let Alexis address some of these issues. Richard, I don't know if you can hear us, but I'm going to move on and let Alexis address some of the concerns from the city councilor's office. Alexis Silsby is with us from the city councilor's office, and she's going to present the current concerns that Mr. Garvin has with these.
Good afternoon. Thanks for having me today. I think that Director Frank summed up the issues pretty well. The resolution seeks to give city employees paid leave to act as a poll worker, which contemplates that the employee would simultaneously be being paid by the city of St. Louis as a city employee, and then also be paid by the Board of Election Commissioners to act as a poll worker. The Board of Election Commissioners is a body created by state statute. So that would violate the charter provisions that prohibits employees from being paid by two different states, or by being paid by the city and a state agency at the same time. And it also would violate the charter's explicit prohibition against employees of the city of St. Louis working as poll workers. So I have PDFs of all these provisions, which I could share on the screen if you all are interested in seeing those specific provisions. But I think that it's very clear what the provisions state, and that this resolution would directly conflict with those charter provisions and with the civil service rules, as Director Frank discussed. And there's also, I did some research and I found a case that stated it upheld termination of two employees who held dual employment with the city of St. Louis Parks Department, and they were employed with the Board of Education for the city of St. Louis, and that was found to be a conflict under this charter provision. And so the Court of Appeals did uphold their terminations. And I think that this would be analogous. I don't think there's any legally distinguishable difference between an employee acting as an employee of the city of St. Louis and the Board of Election Commissioners versus the city of St. Louis employee also being employed by the Board of Education. So I have that authority and these charter provisions. If you want me to pull them up on the screen, I can show them to you. But I think that Director Frank has summed it up pretty well.
Can you share those on the screen so the committee can
Sure.
see them? And also, if you would email them to the clerk so that he can share them also when you get,
I will do
not
so.
right now.
Sure. So I will start out here with, okay. I'm going to pull up first section 19 here. Let me see. There we go. Okay, can you all see that?
Mhm.
All right, so this is Article 18, Section 19, and this discusses political activity of classified employees, so that would be all the civil service employees. And it states no person holding a position in the classified service shall, and then it discusses a bunch of things that are banned, which includes acting as a worker at the polls. And I don't know if you can see that highlight I've put there.
Right. Yes.
So I think that, I mean, to me, this is the most significant charter provision that conflicts with this bill. It's very clear on its face that these this resolution would conflict with this article of the charter.
Okay. And then it's, okay, go ahead.
All right, and so then another one that I thought was relevant here, same article, but section 20. This is the article that I think was referenced in the resolution. This section of the charter provides that city employees are already permitted to vote and may be granted up to 4 hours leave with pay for the purpose of voting. But you'll see that this provision does not include any allowance for city employees to be paid to actually work at the polls. And that would, like I said, conflict directly with the section 19. I also found section 22 of this article to be relevant. This is the penalty provision. This provides that it could be considered a misdemeanor for an employee to commit an offense under this section of the charter. So we certainly wouldn't want to be putting our employees in jeopardy of that. The other relevant charter provision was, let's see if I can get it to pull up here. Here we go. So this is Article 8, Section 8. And this provides that no officer or employee shall receive any additional compensation for serving in any other capacity under the city while in such office or employment, nor hold any office or employment under the state or United States except in the militia or as a notary public or as a teacher in a public educational institution. So this is the charter provision that would prohibit the employees from, in addition to serving as a city employee and being paid by the city, this would prohibit them from then also acting as a poll worker for the Board of Election Commissioners and being paid to do that. This case, this is Hughes versus the Civil Service Commission. This is a case from 1976 where a couple of employees were found to be having dual employment with the city in parks and also with the Board of Education. The Civil Service Commission terminated their employment. They appealed. This circuit court reinstated them. The Civil Service Commission appealed that to the Court of Appeals, and the Court of Appeals reversed the circuit court's decision, found that the Civil Service Commission acted properly in terminating the employees, finding that employment under the state, their employment with the Board of Education did meet that definition within the charter. Yeah, the court found, interpreting this provision of the charter, that those employees had been in violation and that their terminations were appropriate. And then there's also the civil service rule that Director Frank referenced. This is the civil service rule concerning political activity. So this, if you look in section 2C, it says that no person in a competitive position in the classified service shall take an active part in a partisan political campaign. No such person shall take vacation leave or leave of absence to work on political campaigns in the manner herein provided. And then there are various things here listed that constitute a violation. And one of those things specifically listed here is acting as a worker at the polls or phone banks. So based on all that authority, it was my conclusion the resolution would be in clear conflict with the charter provisions and the civil service rules.
Okay. Do you have anything additional, Ms.?
No, that's all I have.
Okay. At this time, I'll entertain questions. Oh, wait a minute. I wanted to see if Tom Shepard, is he on this call? Tom?
Alderwoman Howard, we were under the impression this meeting started at 1 p.m.
Yeah,
that change?
When I announced it, yes, but then when I sent an email to the clerk, I set it for 12:30. I'm sorry. The calendar letter says 1.
yeah.
Okay, but my agenda says 12:30. I don't know. I don't know. That's something I guess the clerk needs to sort out. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, because no one from our office was present for what they just went through, so I don't know.
Oh, okay.
And then was it posted to the public at 1? I think that's and also an important detail, if it was posted at 1.
No, the website says 12:30.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Okay. So, Tom, do you want to comment or you want to speak to this resolution?
Yeah, if we're at resolution 57, sure. This is just a resolution that would request the Director of Personnel to establish a plan to allow city employees an option to have a leave of absence for up to 8 hours on election day in order to work for the St. Louis City Election Board as a poll worker or judge. We know just due to the pandemic and the demographic that's usually working at the polls, they may not, have as many people as they usually have. Some people may only want to work half a day to limit their exposure to the virus or anything like that. So this is would be an opportunity for the city of St. Louis City government to help pitch in with that if the election board is having trouble filling those spots. It would not be for somebody working a poll, a partisan campaign, or working a poll for a candidate or anything like that.
Okay. Do you have any questions? Mr. Shepherd?
Do I have any questions? No, if anyone has any questions, I
Okay.
can answer, but
Okay.
like I said, I missed if you all started at 12:30, then I missed whatever was
I
said.
apologize. I know when I made the announcement, I said 1, but then I looked at my calendar. I have another meeting and I had to move it. So I apologize. At this time, I will entertain questions from the committee members, starting with Alderman Rhodey.
I don't have any questions, but I guess a comment. It seems like this is just, we're directing a resolution that is in clear conflict with the advice of both our personnel department and our city councilor's office. So, I mean, while it's well intended, I don't think I can support something that's gonna, that is in such clear conflict from the people that we're paying to give us advice on these subjects. So that's my only comment.
Yeah, and I would just say this is a resolution. It would be up to the personnel director to come up with a plan if it says request. And if he doesn't, then he doesn't. If he finds a way after the board passes it to say, oh yeah, you know what, we can do this way, then they would have they would be able to do that.
I'm gonna vote present. I mean, I don't have a problem with the intent of the resolution. As I understand it, it's what you're advocating for is a nonpartisan type of work. Is that not right? Or
yes, Mr. Alderman. This would strictly be for people that were working directly for the St. Louis City Election Board.
And would they be collecting? It sounds like one of the issues that was raised, Tom, was that they would be potentially getting paid by the election board.
If they had to get paid by the election board, I don't know if this doesn't say that they would get paid by the election board. I believe this just says that they would get paid by the city.
I thought,
Good afternoon.
Yeah, I don't see in the resolution where it says they would get paid by the election board necessarily. It just says to establish a plan to work as a poll worker.
so is it the intent of the resolution that the city pays the employee? The election board does not pay the employee, and that the employee works at the election in a non-partisan way, is inside the polls or something?
Yes, and see that, so that would be part of, when we're asking the director of personnel to establish a plan. So yeah, so that, it wouldn't, if them getting paid by the election board and they couldn't get paid by the city at the same time, then we would imagine that the plan would have them not getting paid by the election.
So we would pay the city would pay them as if they went to work, but instead of coming to work for the city, they would just work at the election board all day long. Is that?
Yes, just like we probably, people have probably left City Hall to do other things that they were being paid to do that weren't necessarily their specific job description.
See, it says it requests a leave of absence of not more than 8 hours. Are leaves of absence? I'm sorry, I'm not much on personnel issues. Are leave of absence? I thought a leave of absence was considered a non-paid leave. I mean, do people go on leave of absence and collect pay? Is that?
If I could interject, even if they were not being paid for that specific day, I still think it would be a problem because the employee is still drawing a city salary. If you look at this Hughes case that I alerted you all to, the employees in that case were not working their schedules didn't conflict between their primary employment with the city and their secondary employment with the Board of Education. So even though those shifts didn't overlap and they weren't being paid by the city for the time that they were at the Board of Education, the court still found it was a violation of the charter because they were still drawing a salary as an employee of the city of St. Louis.
Technically, when somebody goes on a leave of absence, are those paid leaves of absence? I guess I thought this was a resolution that somebody taking a voluntary day off to work in a nonpartisan position inside the election, inside the polling place. But when you say leave of absence, is there a definition as to whether or not that's paid or non-paid? Does anyone know?
Well, there are different kinds of leaves of absence under the city's various rules and regulations. So I think it could be, I would say probably unpaid could be considered a leave of absence. Normally, I think would be unpaid unless the employee used, some paid vacation or comp time or something like that to cover it. But I see Alderman Gunther's comment in the chat. And I think, the pay thing is really secondary in my opinion. I think that the most important issue with this resolution is that under the charter, a city employee cannot work as a poll worker, and that's very, very clear. So it doesn't really matter that much whether they're paid or not paid or whatever. The charter is very clear that a city employee cannot work as a poll worker, which I think is the main issue. And this issue of being paid or not is pretty ancillary. I just brought it up because it was sort of relevant and related, but it wasn't the most important thing that I thought was the issue with why the resolution wouldn't be appropriate.
I guess what I'm trying to get at or understand is, the Hatch Acts, as they were originally developed, the intent was that they would be a replacement for patronage, and it was not an unusual, or it was, I guess, not far from unusual. It was the common practice historically for patronage officers to take a paid day off to work at the polls for partisan campaigns. And so when you, I guess what's important is understanding what the definition of a poll worker is. I thought, or would have thought, that the intent of any Hatch Act related type of legislation would have been partisan poll worker as opposed to nonpartisan poll worker. Is there any such distinction in any of the research that you've done?
No, there's no distinction under the charter. It just says poll worker.
But I believe that section of the charter does begin talking about partisan campaigns. If you take it in the whole thing in context, the section, most of it talks about, partisan political activity. And then it goes further to say this doesn't prohibit someone from voting who they want to vote for and that kind of thing. But that whole section from, when I read it is related to partisan campaigns, not the.
All right. I think this is the provision that we're all talking about. I just brought this up on my screen again so that y'all can see it. So the way I read this is it section 19, the title is Political Activity of Classified Employees. So I think this encompasses all political activity, not necessarily partisan or nonpartisan. And it says no person holding a position in the classified service shall use his official authority or influence to coerce the political action of any person or body, or to interfere with an election, or take an active part in a political campaign. And then it has more clauses, or circulate signatures, or act as a worker at the polls. So I don't think that.
And then it goes
I don't
further,
agree
or
with your
distribute
interpretation.
badges. It still
what?
looks like it's about partisan campaigns, though.
Yeah,
It's encapsulated in a big paragraph about partisan campaigns.
Yeah, that is historically the intent of the Hatch Act and all of the civil service legislation was originally intended to make employees nonpartisan, and I don't believe that it was ever intended to stop them from, supporting the political process, the election process. So I think that's I don't know what case law you have or what we've done historically as far as enforcing this, but my interpretation of this, and it's been, my understanding of this all along, is that civil servants aren't supposed to be actively engaged in political campaigns. I leave it to you all to interpret how, or review how this has been interpreted historically and whether anybody's been fired for working in a nonpartisan way. I mean, if you're going out registering voters to vote in an election, I guess you could say, oh my gosh, that's a poll worker, but that's certainly not a partisan poll worker. So, I think that's, I frankly think that's a misinterpretation of this, but.
Well, I can't really speak to the intention of the charter in terms of what you're saying. I don't know personally what the intent was behind this charter provision when it was originally enacted, but I do think that the plain language of the charter is that no person holding a position in the classified service shall act as a worker at the polls. And I think that is pretty clear and unambiguous. So I think that, I understand what you're saying, but I don't think that I still think that the resolution contradicts the plain language of the charter. That the charter doesn't say that they can act as a worker at the polls if it's a nonpartisan capacity. You know, the charter does have some parts here. If you look later, it does outline the permissible activities of classified employees in terms of political activity. And it does say that they can be a member of a political club or organization. They can attend political meetings. They can cast their vote. They can express their private opinion on political questions. They can seek election or appointment to public office, provided that they first resign from their position with the city. And I think that if the provision act as a worker at the polls was meant to include or to allow nonpartisan poll working, I think that probably would be so stated in this section, the second part. So I think, I don't think my opinion is changing on this. I think my legal advice is that the resolution conflicts with the clear the unambiguous language of the charter.
Yeah, I would refer to the section title. It says political activity of classified employees, and that's partisan. You know, political activity is partisan. You know, politics and political activity. This is no more political than what civil servants do at their city job. There's really no more political than what anything else anybody does that works for city government. So I think by the title, it's, you know, and all the other words within it, the section, this is dealing with somebody being involved in some kind of partisan political, you know, same thing, activity.
Well, I guess I'm kind of to the point where I'm almost ambivalent about this. I mean, it sounds like I could support the resolution, and the resolution passes and it's superfluous anyway, because we got the personnel director on here and they're going to say, well, thank you for your advice, but I'm rejecting it. And it's all going to be moot anyway. So I don't know what to say. I'll have to decide whether I want to vote for it, which I think is moot, or I vote against it, which I think is moot. So anyway, Madam Chairman, thank you for your time. I have no further questions or comments.
Did you call me Madam Chairwoman? I think you were on mute. Okay. You're muted still.
Oh, there we go. I was unmuted for a long time and I thought, oh, I better mute. Anyway, do you have any questions of either Mr. Frank, Ms. Silsby, or Mr. Shepherd?
Yes, I guess I can just put the question out here. Of course, I'm not President Reed. This wasn't my idea, but I think the intention was to, in light of the void that we have, we know this will be a historic election. We know that there is a shortage of campaign workers. We know that, well, poll workers or whatever you want to call them. We know that there is a deep demand for it. And I guess I'm of course, I'm not a lawyer, but I'm reading what you all are reading, but it appears that this could be a scenario where people aren't specifically advocating for either candidate. They just simply want to fill our void as a city, because we know we have a shortage of workers, and it would place an undue hardship just on our process, period. So I guess if you all are saying that it clearly violates the charter, does anyone have any suggestions of how we could possibly make this work so that we just won't impede our voting process just overall? I guess that's my question, because when you read it, it seemed like it's up to interpretation, and I'm pretty sure that you can probably talk to some attorneys and they'll say, well, it doesn't specifically state that you can't work at all, you know, so the whole notion is partisan, nonpartisan. So I guess I figure I know what the overall intention was, just to fill a void that we're having as a city. So do you all have any other suggestions of how we get there with during a pandemic and during a situation that we know we definitely need the extra hands on deck to further our process?
Alderwoman, I'd like to speak to that if I can. The civil service rules only govern civil service employees. And so we have over 700 county positions, employees, in the collector of revenue, license collector, et cetera. And they would not be bound by that charter provision, nor would they be bound by the civil service rules. From my correspondence with the Board of Election Commissioners, I understand that they're doing fairly well so far, and they may be able to supplement, some of their workers with, some of these county patronage types of positions. But the civil service rules themselves don't prohibit activity in nonpartisan elections. But again, going to Civil Service Rule 15, Section 5, Section 2C, and I think Alexis, maybe if you can bring that up, it addresses political activity, and it specifically mentions a definition for no person in a competitive position in the classified service shall take an active role in a partisan political campaign. So to go to Alderman Rohde's good point, it does in the civil service rules define that if it's partisan, which means Democrat, Green Party, what have you, then it's prohibited. And I know when you work for the Board of Election Commissioners as a judge, you have to declare your party. And this is all, very much against the spirit of and the letter of the civil service rules. As Alexis said, this has been litigated in the Hughes case. Comptroller had to fire a person who just endorsed someone via email for saying this person would be a good candidate, and that person was fired, and it was taken all the way to the Missouri Court of Appeals. I think it's Gordon Jeffrey is the name of the case, and it was upheld that it was a proper termination. So there have been instances. The civil service rules do not restrict you working if it's a ballot initiative that is not partisan, but clearly the November 3rd election is a partisan campaign, although there are nonpartisan elements in it. It is a partisan election, and therefore Civil Service Rule 15, Section 2C would prohibit plainly. And my fear is that if this were misinterpreted by any civil service employee, it could cost them their job, as it has in the past. And that's my main concern. Although I understand and appreciate this is well-intentioned, the resolution, part of the distinction of the civil service system is keeping any kind of prohibited activity away from those civil service employees. So I just wanted to zero in on the civil service rule itself because it provides a little bit more of a definition, more of a fleshing out of the fact that this does pertain to partisan political campaigns. Thank you.
Thank you. So I'll pose the question to Tom. Prior to drafting the resolution, did President Reed seek the opinion of anyone, or did he vet this anywhere to see if it's something that we could do, or?
No, there was no vetting it through the city council's office or anything like that, or personnel. But what we did, want to make clear within it that it would not be for somebody working a poll for a particular candidate or a campaign, that they would just be working for the election board. And again, the resolution is requesting the personnel director to come up with a plan to do that, which he may or may not be able to do. It may be a plan, that some can, some can't, or that we just can't do it. So, we were hoping that deliberation could take place after the resolution is passed. And if they decide they cannot do it, indeed cannot do it, then, we try to have, provide some assistance in case it turns out that the election board is really short on employees come election day.
Thank you. No further questions.
At this time, I will ask Alderwoman Murphy, do you have any questions?
Well, I guess I do. For one, I was wondering, has this ever been done before? That would be my first question. Have we ever done this before under other elections? I thought I read something in the paper. This was done under Mayor Slade's tenure. At some point, I read something in the paper. And then I said, my first impression with this is just has to do with the political process, which of course is fundamental to our republic. It was not partisan at all. But then Mr. Frank brought up an excellent point that when you work for the Board of Election, you generally are claiming that you are going to be a Democratic judge or Republican judge. And when they send out people to get, ballots, whatever it is they do, they're accompanied by the police. There usually is, in my understanding, a Democrat and a Republican that, that come out to make sure when people have to vote from their car or whatever, they send out one of each. So you are declaring that you are the Republican or the Democrat. So that makes, that brings up a whole new, thing. And then I was wondering, is the objection also that they're being paid twice by the same entity? Is that the other problem? Or is it mostly just the political party problem? I'm sorry, that was a run-on question. I don't know who wants it.
It's both, I think.
It's both. Okay, thank you.
But the resolution doesn't state that they would get paid by the election board in the resolution. So that would, we would, if that plan was developed, that would probably be hashed out in the plan. Okay, they can do this, but they can't be paid.
Well, then if they weren't paid by election board, I would assume they would be being paid by the city.
Right.
Well, then you're getting paid twice.
Right. So if it was illegal for them to get paid twice, then we would think that part of the plan that we're requesting to be developed to do this would say, okay, you can't get paid by the election board.
Or
I think that they are paid by the election board. I think all poll workers are paid by them. And I think that the Fair Labor Standards Act probably applies to the Board of Election Commissioners just as it applies to the city, which is that you can't just volunteer to do work and not be paid. There are minimum wage laws that apply that require people to be paid for the work that they do, and those laws cannot be waived by the employee. My understanding is that the poll workers are paid by the Board of Election Commissioners, and I don't think that could be waived.
So are you saying anybody that volunteered to perform any service for government or any agency, if they don't get paid, somebody violated the Fair Labor?
Yeah, so there's a federal law called the Fair Labor Standards Act that requires people to be paid for the work that they do. So with some minor exceptions, I couldn't just volunteer to be a lawyer for the city and just work for free for fun. That would violate the Fair Labor Standards Act, and I would be entitled to recover back wages and liquidated damages and whatnot. So I'm assuming that the Fair Labor Standards Act applies as well to the Board of Election Commissioners, excuse me, and that the employees, when they are hired by the Board of Election Commissioners to work as poll workers, are paid by them, and that law would require that to be so. And then we as the city wouldn't be able to require, I think, the Board of Election Commissioners to not pay their employees to avoid violating one provision of our charter. I just don't think that would work.
I think I'd want to say too, if I may, that the fundamental issue though is just the prohibition against taking part in an active role in a partisan campaign. And if this were done before, which I understand it was before I was here, perhaps under a different city councilor, there was threatened litigation. It went to federal court. It got remanded back to the state court. I don't know that the issue ever got really resolved. But I will say that one of the things that my office does is throughout the tenure I've been here, 16 years, we offer detailed guidance to the labor unions and also all employees. I think I sent it out September 17th, but it did go out to all employees, advising them of what they can do, what they cannot do. And even if we were to get a grant from a private organization to pay these people, it would still violate this, these prohibitions against the civil service and the charter. So I'm terribly concerned that employees, might get confused and commit an unlawful act without realizing it and then lose their job. I mean, then I'm bound under the civil service rules to investigate that and present my findings to the commission. And that has been done from time to time, not too frequently, because we work very closely with the union leaders to make, and all employees to make sure that they understand what they can't do. And that was just my rambling tail end answer to Alderwoman Murphy, the last part of her question.
Well, I'll add to my rambling one more thing. I believe that the litigation you were speaking of, according to the paper, by the time it all came to fruition, the election was over and the suit was dismissed. So
Right.
nothing was ever decided, was my understanding.
It was interesting under Mayor Slay, during one of my first years, he raised the same issue, wanting to do this, and I advised against it. And 2 days later, we got a Freedom of Information request from the Republican Central Committee, which was seeking to take action if any city employees, civil service employees, were going to be participating in the vote. So we all breathed a collective sigh of relief because, we had taken a position against this. So again, I applaud. And what I didn't get to say, Tom, and to some of the other members, is I thanked the Board of Aldermen for supporting the civil service and my compensation ordinance that granted a 3% increase to our city employees. Much needed, much appreciated. And I think the spirit of this, is certainly good. But that being said, I just have a ministerial duty to follow the charter, to follow the civil service rules. So thank you.
That's all. I'm thoroughly confused. Thank you.
At this time, Brandon Bosley, is he on the call? I don't see him. Alderwoman Shameem Clark Hubbard, do you have any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Okay. I have a few questions. Mr. Shepherd, do you know if the Board of Election Commissioners were consulted about this?
No, I don't know if they were consulted.
Okay, I kind of regret that I did not have them here. And I mean, we're 2 weeks out from the election. Do we know if there is a real need for these workers?
We know that there could be. We don't know.
I get that,
So this would be, in case.
Okay, and then, we're just 2 weeks out today from the election process. Would there be enough time to vet these people and have them apply? Is I guess, and I know you probably can't answer that. I guess that would be a question for the Board of Election Commissioners if indeed we did have people want to take advantage of this. But I forgot, I've got other board members on this call, so I'm going to ask Alderman Boyd if he has any questions.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I want to first say that I'm a self-proclaimed lawyer and I have not graduated from an accredited law school, nor have I passed any legitimate bar exam. But I do want to ask some questions of Alexis. So if you don't mind, just for clarity, because this is a great discussion, because it reminds me of an opportunity I had some years ago that I kind of passed up. So the county people that work for county offices, are they exempt from this charter requirement? So if you work for the collective revenue, can you work at the Board of Election on election day?
I believe so. These provisions of the charter apply only to employees who are in the classified service.
Okay, so let me ask you, so as an elected official, I want to go back to if you are a civil service employee, there was the lawsuit that said you couldn't work for the Board of Education, right? And they were fired. If you're an elected official, can you work for the Board of Education?
So let me just pull up the charter.
We're not part of the classified system.
Right, yeah, you're not part of the classified system. So just under the plain language of the charter provision, it doesn't apply. It doesn't apply to you. Sorry, I've got so much stuff open here now. Yeah, so see, it only applies to people holding a position in the classified service. So, you know, absent the person being within that category, these charter provisions just wouldn't be applicable.
Because some years ago, I was advised that I could not work for the Board of Education. And then I questioned that opinion because Peggy Ryan worked for the Board of Education and she was an alderperson. And so that's when I became aware of this, you know, charter provision. And I was told that because she was a teacher, then she was able to work for the Board of Education, but I could not. And I thought that was, you know, and again, I'm not a lawyer, but the way I interpret the charter, that because I was not part of civil service classification, that I should be exempt, but I was told it applied to me, which I thought was unfair. So maybe we need to do more, get more clarity on that, because I agree that an alderman is not part of the civil service system. An alderman does not get unemployment benefits. An alderman does not get sick leave or pay leave. And so we're not part of that system. So I would like to get, you know, more definitive clarity on that, because it did have a negative impact on a job opportunity for me some years ago. So the other question is, if you work for the mayor's office and you're an executive secretary and there's a shortage in the parks department for a couple weeks, can the mayors allow that executive secretary to work in the parks division for 2 weeks?
You know, I would have to do a little bit of research to answer that question, I think, and I apologize. It looks like I've lost my internet connection, so I'm connected by phone, but I'm not in the Zoom call anymore, like on the computer. So yeah, I think that's a much different question than what I was prepared to answer today. So, you know, I could certainly look into that and try to figure it out, but I wouldn't be able to give you an answer off the top of my head.
So there's two. So there's an elected official working for the Board of Education, and there's the question of the mayor can loan his or her executive secretary to a different department within city government for a couple weeks. That's just a case scenario to look into. And the reason I bring that up is because, and it may not pertain to this, but I do remember that when Mayor Slade was, I think Sherry, the current secretary, when it was under state control, was really at the police department, but worked in the mayor's office, but got the same benefits of, you know, whatever they get in the police department. I'm not trying to throw anybody under the bus, but I'm just going by historical, you know, information that I have and how I know a system have worked. So, but at that point, at that time, it was under state control. So I don't know if there happened to be some, you know, exemption because we were under state control, or just like the county offices, you know, may be exempt because they're not part of civil service. And I guess at that time, you know, the police department wasn't civil service. So I just kind of bring that up. And I wanted to challenge you, and not in a negative way, but what you said was, so we don't pay, tell me if I'm wrong. I wrote down, we pay lawyers to interpret the intent. It's not clear and ambiguous. Why I wrote that down was that you suggested that as a lawyer for the city, it's not up to you to interpret the intent of the law or the intent of the charter.
No. I just meant I personally did not have the knowledge of the backstory, like whoever wrote the charter provision. I did not have personal knowledge of what their intention was. But I can say that looking at the plain language of the charter provision, it just says that classified service employees cannot be a poll worker, and it doesn't have any indication there whether that is partisan or nonpartisan. It just simply says can't act as a poll worker, so it seems clear to me.
Right.
just based on the plain language of it. But I was just trying to say, I have no personal knowledge of what the drafter's intent was.
No disrespect. I agree with you, but I do think we pay lawyers to interpret the intent, don't we?
Well,
Because if you go to
I mean, I
court,
guess, but
you
I
argue
think
the
the,
intent of the legislature if you go to court, right?
right. I think what you're getting at here is there's different theories of statutory construction. And so there's, perhaps like a more textualist approach where you just rely on what does the plain language of the statute say, and that's what you go with. There are statutory interpretation paradigms that include looking up the legislative history to try to figure out what the intent was of the drafters. So, I could approach that from various different angles to try to give you a more detailed backstory, I guess, or history of what the drafters intended. I'm not even sure if those resources are available to us. But I think based on my experience as an attorney handling civil service appeals before the Civil Service Commission and before the circuit courts and before the Court of Appeals, I do not think that the judges are going to really be particularly interested in legislative history or the intention of the drafters. I mean, I think that the plain language of the charter is pretty dispositive here. And so I think that, and obviously, I don't have a crystal ball. I'm not able to just guarantee you exactly how this would come out in court, but based on my experience, I would say that the charter provision probably would just be interpreted as it is written on its face, which is that it's a blanket prohibition on civil service employees acting as poll workers, whether partisan or not.
And I'm going to agree with you 100% as far as the case that went to court about working for the school board. That is clear and unambiguous. It's extremely clear, right? So let me ask Mr. Franks this. Mr. Franks, what is a poll worker to you? How do you define a poll worker?
A poll worker is anyone who is taking an active role at the poll site. It could be distributing literature. It could be asking people to vote for a particular candidate, to support a particular party. It could be a person who is assisting people within the actual polling place, or it could be an election judge. To me, the common word there is work. And so if you're performing a function at the polling place, that would be considered work to me. I think something that underscores that is that the International Association of Firefighters was able to lobby successfully the state legislature and get an exemption from certain rules that allow first responders to take an active role in a partisan election, provided, however, that they can't wear their uniform, they can't be on duty, they can't take money for it, and lastly, they can't attempt to influence, the vote of another civil service person. So, so I think even taking someone back and forth to the polls. I did an investigation where some citizens made a complaint against 73, and I had to do an entire investigation. And all they were really doing was driving people back and forth to the polls. And I ended up eventually, concluding that investigation. And as a result, the first that new state statute allowing first responders was passed by the legislature. So that's the only exception to the civil service rules. And again, I would say that the civil service rules, even more than the charter, clarify exactly what it means, that it is for a partisan election, and that one of the things is just working at the polls, and it's been broadly interpreted, whatever that function is.
Right. Okay. So thank you. So I'm gonna ask Alderwoman Murphy. Can I inquire, Madam Chair? Can I inquire of Alderwoman Murphy?
Sure. Oh.
I want to get permission from the chair.
Yes, you can. I'm sorry.
So, Alderwoman Murphy.
Yes.
You were a committee woman, right?
Yes.
In another life.
Yes, for a long time.
So when you think of a poll worker, what is your definition of a poll worker?
When I think of poll worker, I think of the partisan, individual handing out sample ballots, as voters go in to vote. Well, the other, I always think of the people from the Board of Election as more of a professional sort of a thing, and totally different from partisan poll worker from the outside.
So you would expect in your mind a poll worker to be someone that's trying to influence the election, maybe handing out literature, taking people to the polls saying vote for this person, right?
Yes, yeah, that would be my first impression. Yes.
Okay. And so the reason I asked this of our personnel director, because I figured that he would be well-rounded in his interpretation, and I figured that Alderwoman Murphy would be pretty direct in her interpretation because it's either this or that. And I'm probably of the same mindset that Alderwoman Murphy. A poll worker to me is somebody that's standing outside the polls and handing out literature and that's actively trying to encourage voters to vote for a partisan person in an election. It wasn't until I became an alderman that I started looking at literature from the Board of Election that it said we're looking for poll workers.
Yeah.
But if you look at the definition and what they their definition of a poll worker is like an election judge. And I would agree that election judges are partisan. I agree 100%. But what I don't agree with is that election judges are swaying voters to vote for one candidate or another. I think there may be a statute somewhere that's illegal for an election judge to, that would be called electioneering. And I believe that's illegal. And maybe Alexis know more about it than I do. I don't know, but I think that's called electioneering. Would that be right, Alexis? I can't hear you. You're on mute.
Sorry. I'll just give me a minute to see if I can find the statute that you're referencing.
Okay. And you can get back to me at a later date. This is just fun facts for me because I'm really interested. And I think that the resolution, I'd support it. The resolution on its face, but I am listening to the discussion that we're having, and I respect the personnel director and I respect you, as a lawyer, but, being this, this self-proclaimed lawyer, I love to debate issues and I love to think differently. And when it comes to bureaucracy, we're always looking at black and white and not necessarily shades of gray at our laws. And that I think sometimes that we get so wrapped up in this is just how we've always done it. And this is how I'm the personnel director and this is how I see it. This is supreme law. And that's and no disrespect to the personnel director, because it may have been interpreted the same way before Mr. Franks. But I think that when we're trying to do goodwill for our community, it's really important that we don't get bogged down into, strict interpretations. When we're trying to do goodwill, we certainly don't want to do anything illegal. Don't get me wrong. But I just don't see a poll worker defined by the Board of Election is the same as a poll worker defined by politicos, if you will. They're totally different. And so then I would go back to intent. Now, this charter was many, many years ago. And maybe then you have to research, well, when did the Board of Election define what a poll worker was? And I heard you, Alexis, you say, hey, I don't know if the history is there, how far back you go, blah, blah, blah. But from people that's involved in political campaigns, a poll worker is somebody we have to pay and feed in my neighborhood. Some neighborhoods, they volunteer for a while, but it's partisan. And they're trying to persuade voters to vote for trying to persuade voters to vote for somebody. So I just want to bring that up. And then Alexis, you were saying that, hello?
Yeah, let me just interrupt you, sorry. So I pulled up the statute here that governs the election authorities. Because I think that that's sort of an interesting question. I think what you're raising is, well, what is a poll worker? What is the definition of that? And I don't think the statute actually defines that. So we can look in the definitions and see if there's actually a definition for what poll worker is here. It doesn't look like they have a definition for poll worker here. So it is not included in that definition section of the statute. So the statute does discuss different types of employees, I guess, if you want to call them that, or people that are involved in the process. And so you see the section here on concerning election judges, there's challengers and watchers. And I don't see anything here that specifically has a provision for what a poll worker is under the statute. And if you look at the Board of Election Commissioners website, there's a little box here you can click, become a poll worker. And then it says that there's 3 different types, I guess, or subsets of poll worker: election judge, technical specialist, or high school student. So obviously the high school student one wouldn't be applicable to any city employees. But so there's the election judge poll worker or the technical specialist poll worker. The election judge one appears to be the partisan one, and then the nonpartisan technical specialist, it looks like they just run the polling place machines. And then you can click on each of these to get a description of what their duties are and what the requirements are of the position. So this is the election judge that requires you to check in and assist voters on election day. And that does require you to declare a political party, Democrat, Republican, or independent. And then I'll just go back so we can look at the technical specialist one. This says the technical specialist set up and maintain all of the technical aspects of the polling place machines under the direction and rules specified by law, the Board of Elections and poll managers. And so that requires you to lift 40 pounds, have a vehicle, and have basic computer skills. But this does not seem to require them to declare a political party, because you see it says here nonpartisan. So I guess based on that and the fact that the statute is silent on it, it seems to me like the poll worker term would encompass both of these different jobs, both of these, the election judge or the technical specialist. And I think to Director Frank's point, there's a lot of ambiguity here. Different people seem to interpret what poll worker means in a different way, which does create potential pitfalls for city employees if they were to, make the wrong call and accept employment in a way that would violate the city's political activity rules.
Right, and so nothing in what you just shared with us says anything about swaying a voter to vote for one party, person, or another, right?
Correct.
So it's silent on that, and so, because again, I think, and I'm not a lawyer, I just pretend to be one sometimes. There's this thing called electioneering inside the polling place, right? I know that you cannot come in and wear buttons that says vote for Joe Biden, for example, or Donald Trump. You can't wear that stuff in a polling place. And certainly a judge should not be in there saying, hey, look, make sure you vote for Trump. Here's your ballot, right? I think that would be problematic, right? And so, I'm just bringing these up as different foods of thought as we, try to really, think through this resolution. But I also want to go back to something you said, Alexis, and I'm not trying to put you on the hot spot. It's just, I love lawyers, okay? So you said that it would be against some labor laws if people work so if you were a lawyer and you work for free for the city, you may be violating the labor law. Is that what you said?
Yeah, and what I was getting at there is this question of whether the employees would be paid by the city or the Board of Election Commissioners, and whether they could essentially, if you look at that website that I pulled up, it showed that each of those positions was paid a certain amount of money per election. Right. So, and that's relevant to this issue of whether the employee of the city can both draw a salary from the city and then also be employed by a state agency or work under the employment of a state agency simultaneously. So I am assuming, without having confirmed, that the Board of Election Commissioners, just like the city of St. Louis, just like any other state agency, you know, the labor laws do apply. So I think you would need to talk to the Board of Election Commissioners about this to confirm it. But my assumption is that they would not be able to just waive the pay that they would be due to do that work, because the law does require payment for services rendered. And there's not just labor laws, but there's other, you know, common law, you know, equitable remedies that could apply, like, you know, unjust enrichment, quasi-contracts and things like that. So I think, and really what I'm trying to do is just, I don't think I don't think it's a solution to just say, oh, well, they'll just volunteer to work as a poll worker and that'll solve the problem. I just don't think that that seems like an attractive solution, but I think it is much more nuanced and potentially more complicated than it seems at first blush. So I think that you know, what I'm trying to say is just that would not necessarily solve the problem of the employees drawing the salary or the pay from two sources, which would definitely violate the charter.
Yeah, I can see that being very complicated. But let me ask you this. So if you were a corporate executive and the city is in shambles and Anheuser-Busch, let's say InBev, decided that they would loan us a corporate executive to work in room 200, you know, in some capacity, you know, in a capacity that we were lacking the skill sets in, that would violate some type of labor law?
Well, we probably have to pay them at least minimum wage.
Really? Can you definitively send me something to substantiate that? Because only reason I ask is I've heard of these. I've heard of executives being on loan to government entities before, and they got paid by the corporate entity, not by the government. So I'll be curious to know if in fact we would have to pay them something.
I can say,
it would be,
oh, I'm sorry, Alexis. I can say,
I was just going to say, you could just send me those instances and I'll look into it.
Okay, all right. Mr. Franks?
Yes, yes, Alderman. We have loaned people from one job to another because we're the city as a whole. And as long as the city as a whole, as the employer, is paying the employee to perform a function and we're not working them out of their official job class, we can do that. We could put somebody on loan indefinitely as long as Alexis said we're paying them the federally mandated minimum salary for their job classification. And then, so yeah, we could have people on loan in that way. And I'll give you an example. You know, on the mayor's cabinet, since I've been here, the director of the St. Louis Development Corporation, you know, as part of the cabinet, does a lot of work on behalf of and for the city, and yet is not a civil service employee, isn't even a classified employee. But, you know, that's a private corporation that is, you know, paying his salary and his staff's salary. So that does happen. Sometimes we enter into intergovernmental cooperative agreements. You know, I've done that with MSD and some other entities. So those are good points.
So let me ask you this, because you're speaking to a point that I asked about loaning an executive secretary from one department to another. Why couldn't we, Mr. Franks, loan somebody from any department to the Board of Election on that day just to check people in to vote?
Because they're not, the Board of Election Commissioners is not part of the civil service system. They're not a city department. And that's the problem. If they were Parks and Recreation and Forestry, we could do it. And we have done it. But that's the problem. And that's a good nuanced point you bring up, is that, you know, the Board of Election Commissioners is different. Now, we cooperate with them. I know when they've had EEO complaints in the past, you know, my department's assisted them, investigated them, helped them with compensation studies, et cetera. So we do work on behalf of the public and provide support, but we have to continue to pay the employees since we are the city and we're the civil service. So we could only put somebody on loan, you know, for, you know, another civil service employee.
So you know what's interesting? If you work for the collective revenue and you work for forestry, aren't you in the same retirement system?
Yes, and there is a charter prohibition where you could not work for two entities like that. They're all in the general revenue, even though the collector of revenue is a fee office. So you could not work for the collector of revenue and work for, the forestry or any other civil service department. That would be a prohibition. And there's some practical reasons too, because we would then still have to probably pay all those people overtime at the time and 1/2 rate. Because for purposes of the FLSA, we're the city of St. Louis, so we're a city and a county, which really gets complicated.
And that's Madam Chair, I'm sorry. Thank you for allowing me to take up so much time. But I think, Mr. Franks, this is something that we really should look at. I mean, people are always looking at how we can make government work better and more efficiently. This county versus city, but you're in the same retirement system, but you're not subject to the same rules, because like county people can live outside the city. They're not subject to the residency rules, but if you work in parks and recreation, you're subject to the residency rules. I mean, if we're all one city, it's all or nothing. I mean, I just think that everybody should be on the same rules. So anyway, this is
well stated, Alderman Boyd. I agree thoroughly. And
this has been some great conversation.
That our director of personnel is in agreement with some of the things you're stating also.
Thank you. Alexis, thank you for enduring me. I didn't mean to do much at you, but I'm just want to know. Thank you.
You brought up some very good points. I appreciate your insight. Thank you. Okay. Alderwoman Ingracia, do you have any questions? Are you still on this call? Alderwoman Shameem Hubbard, are you still on here?
I'm still on, but I don't have any questions. Thank you.
Okay, I thought you left, but then I saw you were there. Alderman Gunther, do you have any questions? Okay.
No questions. Thank you.
Okay. At this time, I will entertain a motion. I'm really, I guess I want to speak a little bit here. I'm really kind of ambivalent about this. My fear is that as the chair of the Public Employees Committee, endorsing this and moving it forward would give our employees a mixed message. I think there might be some confusion about ordinance versus resolution. A resolution is not law. I understand that, but I'm not sure that the employees all understand that. And then at the same time, what are we going to do with this if we do have an employee that happens to go out there and volunteer and for whatever reason winds up in hot water and subject to dismissal? Do we take responsibility for that? I guess that's my question. In this resolution, do we?
That's an interesting question, ma'am. If I could ask you to ask maybe Alexis, I don't know if the doctrine of detrimental reliance would come into play, but certainly I'm concerned that could be raised as a defense if the commission, Civil Service Commission, found that an employee did violate this and then relied on the resolution from the Board of Aldermen. I think that puts the city in a really difficult place. It's over my head, but I think that's a really good point.
Alexis, can you answer that?
Yeah,
that?
That's certainly possible. I think an employee, if terminated, might try to raise that as a defense.
I think Mr. Shepherd.
Yeah, I was just wanted to get a chance to close whenever you.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
I will give you that opportunity.
All right. Again, this resolution would be for the director of personnel to come up with a plan. Obviously, we would think incorporated in that plan would be some approval process to do it, something that would give clarity and assure that someone wouldn't get fired for taking part and trying to help out on election day. I'm trying to think of any election day that does not in some way involve Democrats, Republicans, Green Party people. So to say that just because there are Democrats on the ballot, that anything you do related to that election day working for the election board is by definition then partisan, that would go for every election day, and we might as well not even use the word partisan. I think there's a distinction between partisan political activity and someone not participating in partisan political activity. So, with the pay issue and like everything else, the resolution was for the Director of Personnel requesting him to come up with a plan where we could do this. And that could include an intergovernmental cooperation agreement, the same as what I think the Personnel Director mentioned with the EEOC, or we loan out people, EEOC complaints where we've loaned out people to, different agencies for that. The same with Otis Williams, he's getting paid. The resolution is for a plan to do this in a way where somebody wouldn't get fired. And I think the charter, when it talks about partisan activity, partisan campaigns, political activity, is referring to someone doing something to help sway a voter to vote one way or another, not working inside in an election, not doing that. Because, if that was the case, then you might as well not even use the word partisan, because then anything you do would be partisan. So, but I respect everyone that came and gave their opinions and thoughts and their experience on this. But, again, the board could pass it, and if a plan can't be developed that does that, then a plan can't be developed, and hopefully they have enough people to work the polls that day. But this would just be an opportunity for us to contribute to the process if a plan can be developed that won't lead to someone's termination or violation of the charter. That's it. Okay,
thank you. With that said, I think I'm going to hold this, and we will revisit it maybe next week. I think we need to have the election board weigh in on this at this time, and maybe, see if they really do need people. We're 2 weeks out. And at this time, I'll entertain a motion to,
Can I say?
Yes.
That also could be part of the process after it's passed, since we're just requesting the personnel director to create a plan that the election board then weigh in on it. Just a thought.
Okay, I appreciate that. But at this time, I'm going to continue. I'm going to hold this, and then we will set up a meeting and invite the election board to find out if they actually need the help. And my concern is having some employee getting out there and getting themselves in hot water, and then having to feel responsible if they lose their job. So I think as the chair of the personnel committee, I think it's my responsibility to protect our employees also. So I will hold this, and we'll confer with the Board of Elections, and maybe have some conversations with Mr. Frank of how to move forward, and possibly rewriting this with the city councilor's office to put some safeguards in there for our employees. And at this time, I'll entertain a motion for adjournment. Do we have a motion to adjourn? Somebody?
Move we adjourn.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
Previous roll? Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am.
Have a
Thanks.
good day. All
Thank
right.
you. Bye-bye.
Bye now.